Welcome to the Paranormal Pendle podcast, coming to you from the heart of Pendle Witch Country in the northwest of England. My name is Craig Bryant, author, investigator and collector of stories. Join me as we take a journey into the paranormal, UFO sightings, cryptozoology and big cats. This is the Paranormal Pendle podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 8 of Paranormal Pendle, broadcasting to the Paranormal UK radio network at paukradio.com. My guest on this episode is Philip Mantle. Philip is a long-standing UFO researcher and author from the UK. He was formerly the Director of Investigations for the British UFO Research Association and MUFON representative for England. He is a regular contributor to Outer Limits magazine and is co-host of Inside the Outer Limits radio show, which is also available on the Paranormal UK radio network. And he's also the founder of Flying Disc Press. So, Philip, great to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on today. Would it be possible, could we go right back to the beginning and could you tell us a bit about how you got into UFOs and UAPs in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. My pleasure. I mean, I can go back as far as I can remember. And I always had an interest in a certain number of things. One was astronomy, the space race, horror films, a little bit of science fiction, but a lot of interest in all things that we would probably class as paranormal. And I was absolutely fascinated by it all. And I was lucky in some ways, Craig, because my best friend who lived just around the corner, I was brought up on a council estate, but right across the road was his grandma. And we lived in an area just outside of Leeds in West Yorkshire. And she used to go to the local spiritualist church at a town called Morley, which is just outside of Leeds. So, from the age of about 13, 14, I used to tag along with her. And I was absolutely, fascinated. I didn't necessarily agree with their conclusions and what they were saying, but I nonetheless found it, fascinating to sit there and listen and take it all in. At that age, we're a bit of a sponge still, and of course, there was no internet in those days. If you wanted to find anything else out, you had to read. And my mum was always a great reader, although she liked novels and things like that. So I read a few books. And one book I read, which wasn't paranormal, it was an astronomy book. It had one chapter in it on UFOs, basically a bit dismissive, but it kind of, grabbed my attention, if you like. So after leaving high school in 1974, it seems like a long time ago, with no idea what I was going to do, in what direction I was going to take. I had one job and then another. But around all this, I still had this fascination for the paranormal. And in over the winter of 1978 and into 1979, I went to work in what was still then West Germany and didn't speak the language. So I asked my mum to send me some books. And somehow she managed to get a whole box full of UFO books. So rather than sitting by the TV on a night in West Germany, which wouldn't have made any difference, I couldn't understand it anyway, I would read. So by the time I came back home, I had a bit more of an understanding about the subject. I'd also seen, the movie Close Encounters in the meantime. And I had an aunt who lived just round the corner as well. On one night, and it's still published now, in Leeds, they have what's called the Yorkshire Evening Post newspaper. And she brought it round and she showed me the classified ads. And there was a little ad for the formation of the Yorkshire UFO Society was coming that Sunday in Leeds at a place called Centenary House, North Street, Leeds, at 2:00. So as you may know, in those days on a Sunday, everything used to shut. You'd one bus an hour. So I got the bus into Leeds. I found this place. And there was about 20, 30 people there. And it had been started by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. Graham was a bit older than Mark, and they'd already been involved for a number of years. And they put on a presentation, and I just sat there, and I felt like I'd found my niche in life, Craig. Yeah. Plus, they also had a table where I could buy some more books, so that was even better. So I sat there for about 6 months, not saying a word. Again, they had monthly meetings. I joined the Yorkshire UFO Society. I think it was something like £2 for the whole year, and that's how it all started, Craig. Had my aunt not seen that advertisement that night, it would probably never have happened. But that's how it all began.
So you sort of went off down the UFO and the UAP route professionally, if that's the right word to use. Do you still have an interest in the paranormal in general, and in ghosts and that sort of stuff as well?
Yeah, I think once you have that interest, it never leaves you. You may not be as in depth as you are on other subjects, but it is something that is always there in the background, and I will still read the occasional thing about it. I'm not up to date, I'll be honest. I'm too busy with the other side of things.
Yeah, sure.
But it nonetheless still interests me. And quite a long story short, I've witnessed what some people would call, I suppose, psychic phenomena at first hand. So I don't need anyone to convince me that these things are authentic. I would perhaps differ on other people's opinions on the nature and origin of this phenomena. But then, that I disagree with pretty much everybody anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And I've experienced it myself. I've sadly, over the last 20 years, I've had a number of serious health scares. And in 2016, I had what I call, or what you would describe as a near-death experience, although I didn't actually die. And I've just written it up for Outer Limits magazine. It's only a short piece because it didn't happen for long. And, I'd talked about it before, but I suddenly realized I'd never put it down in writing. So that's in the current issue of Outer Limits magazine. So I don't need anyone to convince me about these things.
No.
Like I say, I would just probably disagree with some people's opinions on what the nature and origin of them are. But like I said, I'm not up to date. I don't claim to be as knowledgeable on the paranormal as a lot of people, but I do and will always keep a passing interest in it. It is a fascinating topic, whichever way you want to look at it. And there's, like the UFO phenomenon, there is something there for everyone. There really is.
Could you just give us a bit of a teaser then about the near-death experience that you had?
Oh, I'll tell you it in full, Craig. No problem. I mean, one thing that runs in our family is heart disease. Okay. It killed my father at the age of 48, killed my only brother. He was older than me. And in August the 21st, 1999, at approximately 10:45 p.m., I was in bed with my wife, and I had a near fatal heart attack. So, I was in and out of hospital, jumping forward 10 years in time. In 2009, I went down with heart failure. That nearly killed me several times. Someone says, how you not manage to die? I said, well, look, I've shook hands with the Grim Reaper. Best thing to do is keep your hands a bit sweaty, and it slips out of your grasp. And then in 2016, I came home from work one night, felt great. I had an attack of what they call arrhythmia, cardiac arrhythmia, where your heart really speeds up. It went off like a buzzsaw, Craig. Because of the heart failure, I'd had previously a pacemaker with a defib fitted. And I'm literally in my kitchen. I was actually cooking the dinner for me and my wife at the time. And it was a bit like a soap opera moment. I grasped my chest with one hand, tried to hold myself up with the other hand. And just as my knees were about to hit the floor, I'm thinking, this is it. The defib in my pacemaker fired. and it reset my heart rhythm and saved my bacon. But all the while this is happening, I'm viewing this as a third party at the other end of the kitchen.
Wow.
Quite dispassionately, Craig, no emotion. It's just like maybe watching something on YouTube,
Yeah.
And I was higher up. I'm not saying I was up by the ceiling. All I can say is I'm looking down from a higher vantage point, and I watched it all happen. And I was in and out of hospital for the next few weeks. But as soon as I could, I told my wife about it. And she's not interested in any of this, Craig. Nothing. And she shrugged her shoulders. She was just happy that I was alive, never mind anything else.
Yeah, I can imagine. So
the thing about your pacemaker,
yeah,
there's a recorder in it.
Right, okay.
So they downloaded everything in the hospital so they could tell me the exact second that my defib fired.
Wow.
And at no time did my heart stop. I never lost consciousness or anything of this nature. It just went off like a buzzer. Zzz, and had it not stopped, that would have been the end of me.
So, sort of looking at yourself then as a third party, I mean, that must really have changed your view on just everything, just life in general, what happens afterwards.
No, it didn't have any effect on me whatsoever.
Okay.
I mean, nothing. I mean, I was more concerned about staying alive.
Yeah.
Because, I knew about the heart attack. I knew what that felt like. I knew what heart failure felt like. And I knew why I had it, because of the damage that the heart attack did to my heart later on caused heart failure. But the hospital couldn't tell me, or any of the specialists I saw, why this attack of arrhythmia happened. No reason for it. So I was more worried about that happening again. I mean, just an hour before this, Craig, I'd been driving up the motorway, the M62, coming home from work in rush hour. Had that happened at that point, it would have been carnage.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to control the car and get it onto the hard shoulder. So you are, once your defib fires, you are automatically banned from driving for 6 months anyway, and you have to surrender your license, which makes perfect sense to me. If it fires twice within a year, you are banned from driving for 3 years. And again, it makes sense. I was more fearful of this happening again. Not that I was driving or anything like that, but I didn't know what had caused it. So this near-death experience, for want of a better phrase, just was something that happened, didn't change my outlook on anything. I'm not a believer in life after death or anything of that nature, but it just reaffirmed my, I won't call it knowledge, but I call it a bit of knowledge that paranormal phenomena, plural, does happen.
Yeah.
It's not a myth. It's not some lunatic making up funny stories to scare the children. It does happen. We only disagree, like I said earlier, about the nature and origin. I mean, I told this to a friend of mine who is an avid believer in life after death, spiritualism. And he said, "You must have died, Philip." And it was pulling you back. I said, "I didn't die. My heart did not stop. I didn't lose consciousness. I'm just recounting what I can recollect." And I'm looking at it as if it's nothing, no emotions. We've all watched YouTube videos of of a cat, whatever, just like, well, that was interesting, but, and then bang, my wife, I staggered into the living room. My wife was on her way out because she'd heard me shout for her. And it was then back to reality, if you like, phone for the ambulance. The paramedic was there within no time at all. Yeah. And off to the hospital again. I know that routine very, very well. So make of it what you will, Craig. And like I said, I just thought a couple of weeks back, I've never actually written this down. So I wrote it down. and it's with Outer Limits magazine.
Yeah. That's a very interesting story, Philip. It really is, and it's interesting actually how you sort of view it. You know, I mean, some people would see it as a very religious experience. Some people would see it as a very, I mean, you've obviously seen it as a very paranormal experience, something that you can't explain. You know, some people would see it differently. But you know, thanks for sharing that. So that is a really interesting story. Can we get back onto the UFO stuff? You mentioned you got into the British UFO Research Association. Was that quite a while ago? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I joined the Yorkshire UFO Society at its inception, sort of 1979. We were quite fortunate, Craig, that for whatever reason, in the early 1980s, we had a lot of UFO sightings in the Yorkshire Dales, particularly around the market town of Skipton, and one particular place in general, which was Carlton Moor. And of course, from Carlton Moor, we could drive over the moors to that mysterious land they call Lancashire. I think you're familiar with. You know, we could see it in the distance, you know, with a big cloud over it.
So
for whatever reason, in and around those hills and dales, which overlapped into Lancashire as well, and surrounding areas, we had a lot of sightings, and we made ourselves as visual as possible. We had leaflets that we put on pub notice boards, reference libraries. We'd leave it at police stations, you name it. And somehow a lot of people who had these sightings managed to find their way to us. And one thing we used to do was say, how did you find out about us? How did you know to phone us on this number? How did you know to write to this address? So we knew what was working. And there was a time, literally, Craig, it's certainly, you know, maybe 83, 84, that we were overwhelmed. We had so much information coming in, we didn't really know which way to turn at times. So, you know, I spent, you know, a good 9 or 10 years, I think it was, at the Yorkshire UFO Society. And I joined what was called, still is, the British UFO Research Association. The Yorkshire UFO Society was mainly in and around Yorkshire. Bufora, of course, was a national organisation. And I joined them, and I was asked to join there. They used to have like an organising committee that ran the society. So I joined. I eventually became their press officer, their conference organiser, and at one point also their director of investigations. And we managed to you know, rise to the dizzy heights of about 1,000 members, you know, mid-1990s. We had some very large conferences that we had located at Hallam University in Sheffield. We moved it around for a while, but then we settled there. And they were a sellout, you know, they were packed houses. And I was the press officer as well. And I used to have about 100, you know, volunteer UFO researchers, stroke investigators under our wing around the country. So things would come in, I'd either get on the phone to them or I would send it in the post or whatever, fax it, you know. I was really up to date with this monster of a thing next to me that was a fax machine, you know.
Yeah. I remember them.
Yeah, and then thankfully we got, you know, emails started to come in. And I stuck that until, you know, the late 1990s. And then, you know, my children were growing up then, so I had to have a break. Yeah. Though I didn't come out of the subject, I just left the society behind. I'm an honorary life member of Bufora. And I just carried on my own, and I have done, you know, pretty much ever since.
Yeah. Can we just go back then to Carlton Moor and Skipton? Because if anybody gets a map out and looks at the northwest of England and sort of, you know, West Yorkshire, East Lancashire, you're right in what you say. It's an area which sort of overlaps. Skipton is only about 15 miles away from where I live. you'll know that Pendle Hill is very close to this area. And in fact, geology-wise, it's all linked, isn't it? All the way up. It's the spine of Britain, as they call it. There's been a lot of UFO activity in around the Pendle area, and certainly around here, and over towards places like Burnley and Corn, which again are not a million miles away from Skipton and that area of Carlton Moor. So I'm really interested if there's anything more you can tell us about that area.
The village of Carlton is pretty much something or nothing. When you drive through it, there's a Swan pub, of which we did frequent on occasion. Just carry on past it, and then you literally go up the hill onto Carlton Moor. It's mainly, heather, because it's for game birds. So it's not sheep or cattle or arable farming. And you go over a cattle grid that they have there, and then you're on the moor. There's nothing there of any description. And like you say, you just carry on that road. It takes you over into Lancashire and to your neck of the woods. And we had a bit of everything there. To be fair, Craig, a lot of the sightings were these strange lights, but I'm not talking of little lights, 1,000 miles away in the sky that could be anything. I'm talking up close and personal. I'll give you one example. I can't remember the date, so don't ask. It's in the 80s. On that moor, there used to be a cattery. And the guy that owned it got in touch with us, and we went to speak to him. And he said, on a night, I have a routine. Before I go to bed, I do one last check of A, B, and C. It means him going outside of his house. And he said, I see to the cats, I'll do whatever checks he has to do. And he says, I turn around to go back towards the house. And he says, behind my house, and I've been there, and it falls away into the valley. He says, were 5 dinner plates, orange dinner plates, doing aerial acrobatics. That were the words he was using. He said, and he's talking, again, up close, not little lights, way in the distance, literally light. And he said, I've never, ever seen anything like it in my life. One of our members also was Police Sergeant Tony Dodd, who's now no longer with us. Tony and one of his colleagues one night, they used to go up on the moors because they got better radio reception. And an object came across their path at low level. He said it had like 3, how can I say, half ball shaped things underneath it.
Yeah.
And as it went past them, Tony, on instinct maybe, switched on the blue lights of the helicopter, of the police car. And he says, this thing turned and came back. And that's what got Tony interested, and he joined the Yorkshire UFO Society. He even photographed 2 of the lights close up on the moor one night. He wasn't happy with the quality of the picture, so he invested in some camera gear and some high-speed film. And a few years later, on his way from Grassington, where he used to live, round the back roads to the Devonshire Arms pub to meet Graham Birdsall, he was coming down the road, and in the distance was Beamsley Beacon, a well-known point, and he saw this thing in the sky. He stopped the car. His wife Pauline was with him. He gave her the binoculars. He got out the camera, took 2 pictures. And then the third one, he sort of wedged his elbows on the top of his car, took the third one, and he captured this thing. He said it looked like a top-shaped thing with lots of little lights that glowed all at the same time. And he literally see it just before it goes behind Beamsley Beacon. So that'll give you some idea. What we also did, Craig, we did a week-long sky watch on Carlton Moor in a caravan. And you can laugh. A lot of funny things did happen. And we put our own signposts up either side of the moor, pointing to where we were. And we did some local press, and people came out and reported it. Even you mentioned, I'm sure it was it Cone?
Cone, yeah. Yeah, Barnoldswick, that sort of area.
That's it, Barnoldswick. We even had a gentleman from there, from Barnoldswick. I'm not sure if he'd been a mayor local mayor in one of the towns around that area at one point. But anyway, the one story that stands out, just because of its peculiarity, there was like we call them an elderly couple, retired couple. They drove up onto the moat specifically to see us, and they told us a story. It was going back a few years, but not that far back in time. And they used to, in Skipton itself or nearby, there was no big supermarket, but there was one a few miles drive away. So once a fortnight, same time, same day, they would go to, drive to this supermarket, same road. They're coming back one night, and the husband says to his wife, "Oh, look, they've built a new factory." She says, "Oh, yeah." And he says, set back from the road is this shaped thing, with all these windows all glowing of light. And she says, "Oh, fantastic." Of course, 2 weeks later, they go back to the supermarket, coming back on the same route. And guess what? There is no factory. It doesn't exist. And they couldn't make head and a tail of it. It was the same route. They'd lived in the area pretty much all their life. And they came out of their way to tell us this story, as most people did. In fact, that week we were there.
Yeah.
And we also, for example, Mark Birdsall and I got a letter from someone in a little village nearby. I can't remember the name of it now. And we spoke to this gentleman. So we said, "We'll come and talk to you. We'll come." And when we got there, the village was like 9 or 10 houses. It wasn't a village as you and I would probably describe it. And even though we got his letter with the number, whatever, there was no numbers on any of the doors. So we just knocked on the first one, and I thought somebody's bound to know who he is. And this lady answered, and we asked for Mr. So-and-so, and she said, "Have you come about the ghost dog?" "No, what's that?" And she told us the story that every now and again these two red lights would float down through the village, and those were the eyes, of course, of the ghost dog. And of course, in actual fact, all they were seeing was these two red lights float, and they weren't the backlights of a car or anything like that. So once we learned that, we then started asking other questions, and it was amazing what other paranormal happenings you would come across by chance. Had she not told us that, we would probably have never asked the extra questions. But it just fascinated. The whole area ought to be classed as haunted.
Yeah.
Not by any one thing, just haunted. It really did.
So can you tell us a bit about how you got involved in MUFON?
Yeah, absolutely. When I started at the Yorkshire UFO Society a few years down the line, we used to communicate with as many other UFO groups that we could, not just in the UK, but around the world. And that was my job, and we'd started printing our own little magazine at this point. So we would, exchange publications with groups and so on, one of which, of course, was MUFON. And I got on friendly terms with the man that ran it at that point. MUFON is an international organisation, still going today. The chap that ran it in those days was called Walter Andrus. Nice guy, very nice gentleman. And as I moved from the UFOS to Bufora, the conferences that we were hosting just got bigger and bigger. And of course, I invited Walter Andrus to make a presentation at one of the conferences. And it was at that point he asked me if I would become their representative for England, not the UK, just for England. And I said, yeah, it was an honour. I still had enough spare time, if you like, to fit that in as well. And so if any sightings got reported to MUFON, they were then fed back to me, and I'd still use the Bufora network to investigate them. It's just that MUFON would get a copy of any final reports. And I was, honoured to go to the United States in 1996 and speak at the MUFON Symposium in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I was with them again, until the late 1990s when I had to take a break growing family, a proper job, these things that get in the way. I was honoured to be part of the network, and it's still going today, and I wish it all the best.
I'm interested in what you think about some of the more famous cases then, Philip, because if we start pretty close to home, there's been a lot of UFO activity around the area of Todmorden. I'm sure you're familiar with Todmorden, and in fact, there's been some quite big activity of late in and around Todmorden, not necessarily related to UFOs, but related to possible big cat sightings and animal mutilations and that sort of thing. But obviously, the very famous case from there was the Alan Godfrey case, and I'm just wondering whether you've done any research into that and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very quite coincidentally you should mention that, because I've met Alan, several times, and I've communicated with him, online on occasion. And I think it was 3 years ago, Alan wrote his own book about his experience and what happened to him afterwards. For those that are not aware, it was November 1980. Alan was a serving police officer in his patrol car, just finishing his night shift, when he encountered something on Burnley Road. It blocked the road in front of him. It was, again, a top-shaped thing. He said the top of it had like windows or panels, dark panels, but the bottom part was spinning, was rotating. He tried to radio back to the police station, couldn't get through. So he picked out his clipboard that he carried with him and drew it. Now he's in the patrol car, which is stationary at this point. Next thing he remembers, he's several hundred yards further down the road, now driving the patrol car. No recollection of that. He turned around. It had been raining that night, but where this object had been, the tarmac of the road was dry. When he got back to the police station, he was late. He also had a burn mark on the instep of his left foot, and his police boot was split. Mm. So eventually he told his superiors, they asked him to make a formal written report, which he did. And it was some months later that Alan was in contact with UFO researchers when they asked Alan if he would like to undergo regressive hypnosis. He rather reluctantly agreed. They hired two professional psychologists, not hypnotherapy, not stage magicians or anything like that, two professionals. And they put Alan under regression, and each time they put a block on him remembering it. So when it was all filmed, they showed Alan the video they'd taken, and on the video, which I've seen and watched, you see him talking about driving along the road, seeing this thing, and then all of a sudden he throws his hands up in like an X-shaped fashion over his eyes, shouting, "There's a light, there's a light." He's obviously quite alarmed. Cutting a long story short, he goes on to talk about seeing this man we call Joseph, who looks almost, well, it's a white man in a white robe with a beard and a little skull cap. He then undergoes some kind of medical procedure, shall we say, and he sees these little ugly creatures. He's actually seeing grimace on the video. And this is one for all the paranormal guys and the folklorists out there. There's even a black dog. There's even a black dog there. And in fairness to Alan, he'll say, "Look, Philip, I saw that thing on the road that morning. Had I had a brick, I could have thrown it at it and it would have gone plonk. As for the hypnosis, you make of it what you will." Now, Alan put out a little statement. This is when it comes right up to date, just recently, that he'd signed with a film producer. And I got in touch with this film director, and managed to get an interview with him. So only a short interview. What happened, this again, in 1993, the movie Fire in the Sky was released, which is based on the abduction of Travis Walton in 1976 in America. What a lot of people are not aware of is that the production company had 2 movies that they were thinking of making. They could only make one. It was either Alan Godfrey or Travis Walton, and Travis Walton got the tip. One of those involved with that was also a documentary maker, and he did a documentary on abductions, and he came over and interviewed Alan. But he kept in touch with him on and off ever since. And once Alan wrote his own book, he then has now taken the rights to that and is in the process. I think he's going to write it this summer. The screenplay will be written. And I'm not going to give out his name, although Alan did. That's such a, he's a, well, let's put it this way. I had a look on online, and his earnings, his films that he's made, you'll know them when you see the names. They have earned at the box office approximately £500 million.
Wow.
So he's not some small fry director, and I spoke to him and wished him well. I managed to get a little interview. I asked him questions he couldn't answer, like, are you going to film it in Todmorden, Are you going to use, are they going to speak with a northern accent? I said, Tom Cruise obviously can't play it, So, but, I've said to Alan, great, mate, because Alan's not been in the best of health in the last couple of years. So I said, I really hope it happens for you. I really do. Because in my own humble opinion, I think they maybe have made the right decision, and using Travis Walton's. I always thought Alan's encounter would come across better on the small screen rather than the large screen, because it's much more intimate.
Yeah.
And that's exactly, things have changed since 1993. Of course, there were no streaming services then. There was no Netflix or Amazon.
That's right.
So that is probably where it will go. And it may not be just a one-off. It could be a little series.
Yeah. I mean, I'm delighted for Alan, because I've done some research into the case, and I've listened to some of his interviews, and he always seemed to suggest that it didn't do his career in the police force an awful lot of good. A lot of people didn't believe him. A lot of people thought he was a bit bonkers. He sort of had the Mickey taken out of him by his superior officers. And I always got the impression that he was a little bit bitter about what had happened to him.
Absolutely. That's all featured in Alan's book. He tells it all for the first time. We were all pretty much aware of that.
Yeah.
But what is peculiar is, bearing in mind, he got permission from his chief constable to go public with this. So he didn't just appear in the newspapers. And it backfired on him, unfortunately. Alan was, had commendations as a police officer, no nonsense, like he is now. He's a straight talking northern fella, and
aren't we all, Philip?
Yeah, and I wish him well. I really do.
Yeah, I do as well, and I'd love to interview him. I really would. Who knows? Maybe sometime in the future that might happen. But it is an interesting case. What do you think about, let's just put one out of the air, what do you think about Rendlesham Forest, for instance? Because that's another well-known one, isn't it?
Yeah, and what a lot of people aren't aware of is that the area around there in Suffolk has been a hotspot of military technology testing for decades. Literally, I think it's where they first tested radar, for example, at the beginning, during the Second World War. So it is as a location, it's just fascinating. And again, we go back just after Alan's encounter. It's almost a month, really. It's just after Christmas, in 1980, when a series of events. Some say it's over 2 nights, some say it's over 3. Certainly, the first night involved Sergeant Jim Penniston and his colleague John Burrows. Again, for those who are not aware, there was 2 RAF bases there that were leased to the American military, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, and in between was Rendlesham Forest, public land, and some lights were seen to be descending into Rendlesham Forest, which sparked the interest, and a security team was sent with 3 people. One stayed with the vehicle. Burrows and Penniston went into the forest, and I have no doubt whatsoever, Craig, that they encountered something totally bizarre. If you speak to both gentlemen, Jim Penniston will tell you that he came in close contact to begin with a triangular-shaped object about the size of a big saloon car of its day. It was dark. It had red lights on top, blue lights underneath, and it had a series of symbols down one side. He claims he touched it. It was warm. He walked around it for, he says, 45 minutes, and he drew it in his notebook. However, just literally yards away is John Burrows, his colleague. And he says, I never saw any of that. I didn't see no triangular-shaped vehicle. All I saw were these strange lights. I didn't see my colleague walk around it or touch anything, and this thing then, whatever it was, moved off through the forest, and they took off after it, and after 20, 30 minutes, they gave it up as a bad job. It was gone. And they went back to base and reported it. Some say 2 nights later, some say 1 night later. Colonel Holt, the deputy base commander, is on a pre-Christmas dinner at the base when someone approaches him and says, Colonel, what? It's back. He says, what's back? He says, the UFO. He gets changed because he's in civilian clothing, picks a bunch of men, they go into the forest, and he takes with him his dictaphone, little tape recorder.
Yeah.
And doesn't have it running all the time. It's infrequent. And he claims he sees this thing that explodes. There's lights in the sky, shooting beams of lights down at their feet. Also on the weapons storage area. And when I say weapons storage area, I'm talking nuclear weapons, which we, as the general public, didn't know was there in 1980. But if you remember the Greenham Common ladies protesting, if they'd have known they were there, they'd have been, camped there as well.
Yeah.
And, Colonel Holt sent off a memo that was sent both to the MOD and to his superiors in the United States Air Force, and nothing happened. Nobody came. There's no feedback, no response, no nothing. So the story of Rendlesham died. Local people were aware of it. It was Dot Street and Brendan Butler, who were local UFO investigators. So there was rumours, but nothing else. It was just a rumour. There was nothing to see. In 1983, under the Freedom of Information Act in the United States, a copy of the Holt memo was obtained by UFO researchers there. And that, broke the news of what happened. And the rest, as you say, is history. Yeah. Now, a lot of people will argue about what happened or what didn't happen or how many nights and how many people were involved. It's a fascinating account in its own right. These 2 gentlemen, Burrows and Penniston, undoubtedly encountered something phenomenal.
Yeah.
But exactly what, even they don't know.
No.
They disagree on what they saw. It's not as if you and I saying, well, I saw that thing and it had 3 windows. And you say, well, I saw the same thing, but it only had 2 windows. Yeah. No. One of them saying, I saw this craft. The other one saying, all I saw was strange lights.
Yeah.
And they're literally only yards apart.
Which is the odd bit about the account, isn't it?
Well, what both gentlemen will say is that, whatever this thing was, it could make you believe what it wanted you to believe.
Perceive it in a different manner. Yeah.
That's their opinion. I agree in a kind of way, but that's a whole long story. But nonetheless, they saw something peculiar without a shadow of a doubt. They really did. They claimed they found marks where this thing had been on the ground. The police were called out later that night that they weren't impressed by the marks on the ground, but there was nothing for them to see. Whatever had happened was over and done with at that point.
Yeah. Given the fact that there's so much military activity in that area, Do you think it could have been something military? Do you think? Because it's on the East Coast, isn't it? And we know that all up and down the East Coast over the years, there's been quite a bit of military activity, especially from Russians, for instance. I mean, they're well known for, pinging our airspace, especially over Scotland, and testing our response times for fighters and all that sort of thing. And there was one not too long ago, I believe. Do you think it could be something military, or do you think it is something more otherworldly, shall we say?
If we look at it from a military perspective, or we'll say man-made perspective, for want of a better phrase, I have a colleague called Russell Callahan who likes to remind people that part of the base's responsibilities, apart from being on the front line, because they had 18 tank busters there. At this point in history, the Solidarity movement was, on the march in Poland. Russian tanks were on the border, and anything could have kicked off. Yeah, However, also part of their remit, if you like, was they were a space recovery station, and they even had a replica of the United States space module spacecraft that was splashed down in the ocean. They had one. Okay. A model, a full-size thing that they used to train with. Right. Russell had the opinion that somebody was playing what we'd call silly buggers. And they used that, and these guys fell for it. Just recently, just this year, I believe it was, an Englishman by the name of Nick Redfern, who lives in the United States, penned a book. I can't remember the name of it, and I've read it as well. Please forgive me. But his idea is that this was a military test of the base's security,
right?
And that drugs were used, all kinds of lasers, equipment that we're not familiar with, to test the base's security. In other words, the strange balls of light. Our own MOD did a study on UFOs called Project Condign, finished in 2000. They came to the conclusion that UFOs are strange balls of plasma. Nick is of the argument that they can now manufacture this plasma, artificially, and use it as a kind of a psychological warfare weapon. So if you get too close to it, it's electrically charged and it scrambles your brains. In other words, you'll see things that are not there.
Right, so it's like a sort of hallucinogenic sort of thing.
Yeah, combined with the hallucinogenic drugs that were sprayed into the air and lasers and other things. So there are sort of two man-made ways of looking at it. And what is interesting, when you go back to when the case first broke in the sort of 1983, that was one of the theories that was floating around even then. Some people argue that Colonel Holt seemed to handpick the men that went out into the woods with him, rather than, you lot, come with me, that they were picked out for a reason. Colonel Holt denies that, of course. But who knows? Who knows? All I would argue is that even if you go down that route, something quite bizarre did happen that night.
Yeah.
Because why would you carry out a test of a nuclear base when just across the water in Eastern Europe, things could have kicked off at any time? These gentlemen there, although the ones involved were not necessarily the fighting men, they were base security, but they would have been in charge of protecting any foreign forces getting anywhere near that area. And they were all trained to do that. They were all trained military men as well. So it doesn't quite make a lot of sense. Why not try it out on some little base in the middle of nowhere somewhere where, but I don't know. So I think it's one of those stories that's going to, the story that's forever going to give you things. There's always something new going to crop up. And again, just this year, there has been 3 lots of anonymous statements go online claiming to show photographs from that incident. But of course, it's anonymous. We don't know who it is. And they're pretty much being dismissed. But however, it still carries on because those that were involved do claim that film and photographs were taken. So we shall see.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting take. I've never heard that aspect of it before. I found when I was doing some research into you, Philip, I found a piece that you'd written recently for a well-known British newspaper about the famous alien autopsy, the one that's been debunked on a number of occasions. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, again, we go back to my days at Bufora when I was their press officer. And in 1993, a letter landed on my desk. Bear in mind, there's no email then, and it was from a company in London called the Mailing Group. And they were just asking if we could assist them in the making of a UFO documentary. And I responded, told them what we could and couldn't provide. For example, Bufora didn't have access to photographs and films, but I knew companies that did. And so a few letters and faxes exchanged. And then I finally spoke to the gentleman on the letter. It was called Ray Santilli. He was the owner of the company. And we tossed some ideas backwards and forwards. Then out of the blue, the subject changed, Craig. It wasn't, we're going to make a UFO documentary. It was, Philip, I've actually got film of the UFO crash at Roswell and the aliens being dissected. I said, well, that's caught my attention. Simple question. Show me. You've made this claim, not me. Show me. It went, yes, I can. No, I can't. Yes, I can. No, I can't. In 1993, Fire in the Sky came out, the movie. I was hired to help promote it in the UK. One of the things I did, I put on a presentation for Travis Walton and Mike Rogers in London. And, they put on a marvellous presentation, promote the film. And the location of this wasn't far from Ray Santilli's offices. So I invited him along. And I met him for the first time there. And he said, told me the story that the year before he'd been out in the States. His main business was music. He had a big collection of memorabilia as well. And he was looking for old bits of film and photos of the rock stars before they were famous. He claimed he met an old boy, bought a piece of Elvis footage from him. And before he flew home, this old boy come back and said, well, do you think that was interesting? Before I was a freelance cameraman, I was in the military. And in 1947, I was flown to Roswell, filmed the crash, the dead aliens. And he said, I had to hold some of the film back for special processing. But by the time I contacted Washington to come and pick it up, nobody replied. So I just kept it. And he says, I like the way you do business, cash, don't mention my name. And he claimed he'd done a deal. So I said, that's a great story, Ray. Show me. Yes, I can. No, I can't. So I said, in the end, I said, get lost. Don't waste my time. Anyway, give me his business card. So we moved forward in time to early 1995. And this time a VHS video landed on my desk called Roswell. And it was a movie that had been made about Roswell. I think Sony were the company that were releasing it, and they just sent it for review. It wasn't any big, movie at the theatres. It was a, your local Blockbusters or Woolworths. I think they were still open then. And it just reminded me of Santilli and his story. So I pulled out his business card and rung him up. And he says, I said, you still got this film? He said, yeah, but you don't believe me. I said, well, you got to show me it. This time he said, okay, make an appointment with my secretary and come on down. So my wife and I, she was also part of Bufora. We drove down to London, met Santilli in his office on Balcombe Street, and hey presto, shows us a piece of film, claims it's, the alien filmed in a tent in the desert before it was shipped off. And then over the subsequent weeks, it showed us two different autopsy films. Only one has been released on TV, and then some debris, wreckage. And I'm sat there thinking, well, what the hell, So I was also Bufora's conference organizer, and I already had a conference already booked, all the speakers booked for August of 1995 at Hallam University in Sheffield. So I asked Santilli, I said, what are your intentions? What do you plan to do with this? He said, I'm going to make it into a documentary and just release it myself on video. So I said, well, will you show it at our conference? And to my amazement, he said, yes. On one condition, he says, you help me with the, with the documentary. So we shook hands. There was no money involved or contracts. I helped him write in fact, I wrote the documentary for him. It was narrated by Brian Bressard. And the film eventually, the story of it leaked out. And then it just snowballed from there, Craig. I mean, literally. At that point, there was no television involved, but TV soon came in and the checkbooks were flying. And it was released on television in August 1995 around the world. Santilli came to our conference, showed it. It was packed. He took questions from the audience. So I was confident that once this thing was out in the public domain, Craig, I could sit back and I say, right, let the information pour in. Somebody's bound to know something about this damn film. Either, oh, my granddad told me about that, or no, that I'm one of the actors, or, I provided the props, or whatever. Absolutely nothing happened. Not a thing, one way or the other. So, Santilli, said, I'll give you bits of film for analysis. He never did. So we had to work on what we had, which is a video. All the things you see in it are all circa 1947. There's a phone, there's a clock on the wall. We showed it to a whole host of medical people. They were pretty impressed with it, to be honest, as did TV companies, not just us. And so we couldn't, lots of people said it's a hoax, but that's an easy option. People accuse me of being in cahoots with Santilli to promote this thing and make a load of money. And so I took it rather personally. One of the reasons for that is at the same time as this was happening, I was having an extension built on my house. I thought, where's Mantle getting his money from? He didn't have that kind of money. Well, they were right, I didn't. But my wife did. She'd had her own property before we met. It had been rented out for a while, but we now sold it, and we used some of the money of that to build an extension because we had two young kids. It was either build an extension or move, so we built the extension. So I sat and told Santilli, I'll find out. I'll get to the bottom of this. I thought rather quickly. Took me a lot of years, to be honest. We'll jump forward in time. In fact, I'd proven bits of it were fake. But it all came down to when you sat in Santilli's office, Craig, he was a man who never made anything in his life. He was a buyer and seller. You've got a photograph behind you. Oh, that's the Beatles. I'll buy that off you, or I'll license it from you. I use a rather nickname for it, but he never made anything. And I thought, well, whoever's made this film, it wasn't Santilli. Maybe he's bought it in good faith and he's been conned. As it all turns out, we found the man that made it. He was a chap, or is a chap, called Spiros Malaris. Spiros has a number of strings to his bow. He was trained as a young man as a mechanic, but his passion was magic and filmmaking, and those were his career. He's a magician and a filmmaker and a businessman. And there's a long story behind it, but it is Spiros who made it. I've been to his home. I've seen his diaries from that time, meeting with Santilli at X. A storyboard he painted. He's quite a good artist himself. Faxes from Kodak. All this kind of stuff, lots more I could go into, but there's no doubt about it. It is 100% fake. Spiros is the man who's behind it. There was others involved as well earlier on, not connected to him. The idea didn't originate with him. And I released it all in a book called Roswell Alien Autopsy. I've done a revised edition. So what I did with the revised edition, I could put I've done it 8 by 10 inches. Try my age there using the old imperial measurements. I've no idea what they are in centimetres. Not a clue.
I still work in feet and inches, Philip. Don't worry about it.
that big by that big. That's it, you know. And but that allowed me to put in full-size copies of some of the letters, the documents, the photographs, faxes. So you, not only do I summarise them, you can see the actual documentation for yourself. And Spiros, were it not for the pandemic, would have had his own book out last year. It's imminent. It's ready. I've seen pictures of it. He's not doing print on demand. He's having, physical copies printed.
Right.
So he's waiting for the printer. His book is on the list of things to be done.
Yeah.
And that should be out any time this year, certainly in the summer.
So what was his motivation for making the film then?
Money. I mean, originally, it was just going to be on his home video.
Right.
So we would have put it on there with some interviews that he got. I wrote it, bear in mind. I even lined up Kodak in Hemel Hempstead to analyse the film. Santilli didn't live that far from where Kodak lived. He could have driven it and dropped it off himself. That never happened. He paid Brian Blessed, another Yorkshireman, to narrate it. But once the story got out into the public domain, things changed, Craig. You have to remember, this is the X-Files generation.
Yeah.
And it's then that film, TV, newspapers became involved. To begin with, when it leaked out, they couldn't find Santilli because it didn't mention his company name. But Philip Mantle in Batley, West Yorkshire, I'm in the phone book. And I didn't know it had gone out. I just woke up this Sunday morning and the fax machine had just gone into overdrive. There were faxes from newspapers and film companies around the world. And then the phone never stopped ringing for 3 days. And I mean, literally. I remember one chap, he said, well, I've been trying to get through to you for 3 days. He says, why don't you get another phone line put in? I said, don't matter how many phone lines I have, there's only me here to answer it, And so it was when the television companies came involved. Santilli had a private screening of some of the film on May the 5th, 1995, at the London Museum. And there were a lot of film, TV people there. And that was basically, he sold it there and then. Give you one example. Fox in America, they made a documentary called Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction, still on Netflix now. I'm in it. And I think they paid him something like $300,000 plus a share of the home video rights, because we're still talking videos at this point, And he sold it to different countries around the world. It was in newspapers and magazines, some of whom paid for stills. And then, of course, in 2006, he made the movie Alien Autopsy, starring Anton Deck, those lovable guys from Saturday Night TV, And again, I think he made, him and his business partner, upwards of, just on that, somewhere around £500,000. So when you add all this up, these are only the things that I'm aware of. There'll be other deals that he did that I'm not aware of. We're talking 10, 20 million.
Staggering, isn't it?
And then this will make you laugh. Just literally as we speak, 2 weeks ago, there is I call it a website because I don't know what the hell to call it, but it's called Bidaware. But it's an online specific auction site. And Santilli put one alleged authentic frame of the alien on there. You can see a picture of it. The starting bids were $1.1 million. Nobody bid on it, but so I, as a joke, I emailed him and said, I'll give you a tenner. You must be skint, mate, What
did he say to that then? Go on.
Well, he just emailed me back and said, next time you're in London, let's have lunch, Philip.
Yeah, lunch is on him, obviously.
Yeah, he didn't take any offence. And, I've got no grudge against him. I've got no axe to grind.
No.
But it's one of those stories. When I first met Spiros Malaris, when he came out of the woodworking, I said to him, this damn film is never going to go away, Spiros. And he said, don't be daft. Well, he believes me now.
Yeah.
Because it crops up in the most unlikely of places. It really does. For example, I think it's 2-3 years ago, there used to be a UFO exhibition in Blackpool, of all places.
Yeah.
And it closed down. And I went to see the owner of it, because I collect UFO memorabilia. So I went to see if he would sell me some things. And lo and behold, what's he got on display? The alien autopsy film. I didn't try and buy it because that wife would have gone mad, But it was full size. And, it's in a museum in Japan. In America, they were making alien autopsy cakes for Halloween. And, there's games of it. And what the next thing will be that crops up, I don't know. But I know something will. Well, and it will continue forever.
Yeah. From a personal perspective, I'll be honest with you. I was never, ever, ever convinced about it in the slightest. And yet, obviously, he's obviously made an awful lot of money out of it. I just find it staggering.
It's so embedded in popular culture.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
In the X-Files, The Simpsons, there's an episode of the comedy series Seinfeld, which is usually popular in the States. It's even in that.
Yeah.
And a whole host. And what it also did, it spawned a cottage industry of other alien autopsy films that have been made around the world, claiming to be the real thing, of course.
Yeah.
And they still continue to appear, from places you've never, ever seen it before. And it will continue like that ad infinitum. It really will.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's an absolutely crazy story, really, when you think about it. Can we get on to Flying Disc Press? Just tell us a bit about that. How that all came about.
Yeah. A friend of mine by the name of John Hanson, who's a retired police detective in the Midlands, he runs his own publishing company called Haunted Skies. I would recommend it to anyone. And John had been publishing his own books for a number of years, and he was trying to encourage me to do it. And I said, well, I'm thinking about it, John, but not for a few years yet. I want to wait until I retire and then start it. However, in 2015, in my time, I've also been a magazine editor for 3 publications. So I just know people around the world. A Polish colleague of mine sent me a fully written manuscript, not for publication. He was practicing his written English. His spoken English is pretty good, but he was practicing his written English. He said, well, you look over this for me, Philip. So when I read it, I thought, that's a hell of a book. It's called UFOs Over Poland. And I just, I gave him some feedback and I just left it there. Told John about it. He said, why don't you publish it? I said, well, I don't know how to go about it. I don't know where to start. He said, well, I'll show you. So he did. I made some mistakes because I jumped in with both feet. So in November 2015, Flying Disc Press was launched. And the first book was UFOs Over Poland by a chap called Peter Chielebius. You've no idea how long I practiced to try and say that name. From a Yorkshireman, that's not easy to say, But it is a terrific read. It really is. And then in 2016, I took ill, as I explained earlier, with the near-death experience. And I got the opportunity to take early retirement. So I did. And then that was it. Flying Disc Press was going to be my interest, the thing that kept me out from under the wife's feet while I retired. So UFOs Over Poland was followed up swiftly by UFOs Over Romania by Dr. Dan Farkas. Again, fascinating read. And my reason for doing this is because the majority of the cases in these books, Craig, you would never have read before because of the language barrier. This was the first time they were being published in English. And again, I made mistakes, but the book, the information in the book stands on its own, irrespective of a few typos here and there, Yeah.
And of course, there'll have been a lot of stuff from when these countries were part of the Soviet Union that was just suppressed, would never have got out because of the political situation in those countries, So
absolutely, UFOs was a banned subject for long periods in the old Soviet Union. So it progressed and it progressed. Got to the stage where 2 years ago we opened Flying Disc Press in France. My colleague Jean Ribeiro runs that. Jean is a professional translator, so he speaks English, Italian, and Spanish. And he's done now, I think, 5 or 6 of our books, which is great because we were only planning on 2 a year. Then we have Dario Hernandez in Argentina, who runs Flying Disc Press Latin America. Dario has also published a number of our books in Spanish. So we've got other branches going out there. We've also done, deals with other publishers. We got one of our books published in Russia. There's 2 more waiting to be published. They've just held back because of COVID. We've had some published in Romanian, in Italian, Lithuanian. There may well German. There may well be other languages I've forgotten. But, we've done okay. We've managed to keep afloat during the pandemic.
Good.
And, I've got books out now, more to come. I'm planning for next year, because next year is the 75th anniversary of Flying Saucers.
Right.
So, hence I usually find when I try and plan anything, Craig, it just fails dismally. In the past, if I just let things flow, that seems to work all right.
Yeah.
So I'm planning some things, but the rest of it, I'm just going to let and see what happens, Yeah. So it keeps me very busy. I still research the subject. I still write about it on a regular basis whenever I can. And, help others, who are trying to get into the subject or are looking for information on whatever, and it takes up a lot of my time. It really does, which I'm happy to say I'm glad about that.
Where can we find you then on the internet?
Yeah, just flyingdiscpress.com. That's disc with a K. That'll take you. The reason I use that title, because in the early days, they were called Flying Discs.
Yeah.
And disc with a K at the time. That was the American way of spelling it. So that's hence Flying Disc Press. And, we've had some luck. We've had a couple of bestsellers on Amazon. One that's in the process of being made into a documentary series. Another one that's been written up as a TV drama series. And, we're hopeful that some of the others will follow suit. We'll have to wait and see.
So out of all the books that you've published, if you had to pick just one to take with you onto a desert island, which one would it be?
Well, it's got to be one of mine, surely, No, I've got some of my own work on there. For example, I wrote a novel about alien abductions. It's called Once Upon a Missing Time. That's based on my book Without Consent, which I wrote with a colleague called Carl Negatus. But that Without Consent is all about abduction and missing time cases in the UK. And Alan Godfrey, whom we spoke about earlier, is in that book.
Yeah.
I've written a couple of books with my friend Paul Stonehill in the States. Paul's originally from the Ukraine. So one book's Russia's Roswell Incident, speaks for itself. The other one is Russia's USO, so undersea objects. And that's done well. We've got that in a few different languages. That was the one that got published in Russian. But, there's something for everyone. I've republished some old stuff as well, little things that will cost you, a $5. Others that are more expensive. What we've just now been able to do is some of our new books is have them in every format. So we'll have them in Kindle, in paperback, hardback, and audio books. So if you're one of those that doesn't like to read, likes to just download it and stick the earphones in and, rather than listen to the kids screaming or the mother-in-law complaining, you know. And we will continue to do that in the future. So I'm very happy with that.
Well, I've had a look at your website, and there's a lot of books on there that really piqued my interest when I had a look. So I highly recommend that anybody who listens to this podcast to go along and have a look and have a look at the body of work you've got on there. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Philip. It's been fascinating. It really has. Thank you for your insights. You've got some really interesting insights into some very famous cases, stuff that I'd never heard before. And as I say, it's been wonderful to speak to you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Craig. Thank you.
Thank you to Philip for a fascinating and enlightening chat. I really enjoyed talking to him, and I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Paranormal Pendle as much as I did. Remember to check out my website at www.craigbryant.co.uk, where you can find out more information about my book, this podcast, my research and upcoming projects. Remember to stay safe, and remember to keep watching the shadows.